Okay, so before we start, a little bit of a disclaimer. And this is more for the recording, if anyone watches it, the 5 people that watch it on YouTube. But this PowerPoint is a simplification. It's a summary of the entire topic. So there's a lot, but it is a simplification. So we're only focusing on ancient writers and modern writers that are on our key source sheet that I've just handed out to you. Doesn't mean that there aren't other historians that you could write about too. Okay? Not right now, but you will afterwards. Okay. Would you like access to it now? No. Okay. Afterwards, I'll upload to YouTube, but I'll also share this PowerPoint with you on the study part of the OneNote. So again, with the survey, we are just going to brush over this, not massively, but looking at the geo-setting, natural features and resource of ancient Sparta, we get a sense of where Sparta is within Greece and the Mediterranean. As a reminder, when we get closer, we can see that Sparta is down. So we've got the Peloponnesus down the bottom part of that Greece sort of peninsula, okay, and Sparta down being the bottom there in Laconia. And so in regards to geographical settings, Sparta was situated at the end of a small but very fertile river plain about 14 kilometres long. You can see where Sparta is situated in the middle of a valley there, alongside the Eurotas River. So pretty physically, physical in regards to physicality or location of geographical location. It's a very advantageous spot. Spartan territory ran to the sea at Githyon, 46 kilometres away in the Laconian Gulf, and that is down to essentially southeast of Sparta. And also Sparta is surrounded on 3 sides by prominent mountain ranges. We have one here, okay, the Parnon, okay, the Taygetus, and the Arcadian mountain ranges. So again, for the survey, you don't need to know heaps and heaps of stuff. You still need to know enough, but I'm just breaking this down in a more simplistic way. So when we look at natural features, we know that they're surrounded by 3 mountain ranges. Hello, welcome. That provide it with natural protection. The three main mountain ranges are Mount Taygetus, which protected the west, the Parnon Mountains that protected the east, and the Arcadian Mountains, that protected the north. The Eurotas River is another natural feature you should write about if you get a question on this, and was crucial to the agriculture. And the Laconian Gulf was also important for trade. And for resources, keep it simple. You don't need to know 10 different things, okay? But limestone and marble were quarried from the mountains surrounding Sparta. The rich soil in the valley was used to grow barley, olives, orchards, and grapes. Sheep of Laconia were prized for their wool, and Spartan sheep and goat cheese was highly regarded. So for just the latecomers, this is going to be a pretty long presentation, so just lock in, eat some snacks, ask questions, okay? And then the last bit for survey we have is significant sites in Sparta. If we look at this map here, the bit in purple is what's considered Sparta, and everything around that is just the outer regions of their territory.
Is this presentation on OneNote?
It will be on OneNote afterwards, yeah. What I'll do is, Brianna, I'll upload this onto YouTube as a recording, but I'll also share this PowerPoint on the study section. Okay? Yeah. Now, in regards to significant sites in Sparta, we're talking mostly about religious buildings, as well as the Acropolis, which is a political sort of building as well. So you'll notice here that only the Acropolis and the Temple of Athena of the Bronze House are located within Sparta. All the others are located outside. Okay, so Sparta's Acropolis, right kind of in the north of top part of Sparta, although not fortified, can be understood as the center of Spartan power. The Temple of Athena of the Bronze House was the only other significant site located on the Acropolis, just here. Okay. The Sanctuary of Artemis Orthia was located on the edge of Sparta near the Eurotas River. Okay, right there. And then we have also the Menelaean and Amycleon were located kilometers away from Sparta. And the significant sites of Sparta were closely linked to politics and religion. So if you get a question on significant sites, think of these religious buildings, okay, as part of Sparta. Yeah? So when you think about it, when we get a question on natural features and resources, that's stuff that comes from the land. Okay, significant sites are what's been human-made. Does that kind of make sense? How to differentiate there? So this is the main part, and this is going to be broken up into 3 main areas. Does anyone know off the top of their head what are the 3 main sections of the syllabus for focus? So that's one of the dash points. What are the big dot points? Yeah, that is one, yep. Cultural and everyday life, very good.
Religion.
Yes, religion.
Politics.
You are close, social structure and political structure. Okay, good job. All right, so before we do that, Always remember, this is our central argument. Whenever we write about Sparta, if you're ever struggling, always think about your examples and how they supported Sparta in achieving this. So remember, Spartan society was structured around the concept of absolute obedience and support of the Spartan state. And this led to values such as iron will and discipline being valued above all as they supported the military ideology of Sparta. However, the representation of this in historical accounts need to be considered, as they may contribute to the Spartan mirage. What's the Spartan mirage in your own words?
It's like,
It's a hard one.
it's an idealistic version. It's how they want the world to see them.
An idealistic version of Sparta, how they want the world to be, the world to see them,
How they want to be remembered.
how they want to be remembered. So a bit of legacy.
It's like the pop culture version as well.
Pop culture version of Sparta, nice. And out of writers, so when we think about writers who contribute to our understanding of Sparta, if we break them into groups, ancient and modern, which out of those two groups contribute most to the Sparta mirage? Ancient writers, yeah? And so you always need to take what they say with a grain of salt, all right? So social structure and political organisation. Isabel, great job, you got that one. First bit we're looking at is the Great Retra and the issue of Lycurgus. We did this a long time ago. This was term 4 last year. Okay, so it's good that we kind of go over this. So according to Spartan legend, Lycurgus was the architect of the Spartan political system. Ancient sources predominantly write about him as a real person, even a godlike figure. So you remember which ancient writer referred to him as almost a demigod? Herodotus, very good. Okay. On the other hand, modern historians are far more skeptical of Lycurgus. So a retra is something that is something important that is spoken, right? And then it has other implications politically after that. The Great Retra in Spartan history is the Spartan belief that the Delphic oracle spoke to Lycurgus, and the information spoken formed the constitution of Sparta. Oracles were viewed as inspired by the gods, so their contributions were seen as a form of divination. Therefore, the Great Retra was viewed by Spartans as divinely inspired. And what's the power there? If you're saying that your constitution is divinely inspired, how does that give it power? Say that again? It can't be changed. It can't be questioned, especially if you believe in that religion. So what's the main issue with Lycurgus? The two main issues are, one, whether he existed, and two, whether he did what the Spartans believed he did. So the common thread in ancient sources is the link between Lycurgus receiving a retra from the Delphic oracle, and that retra forming the foundation for the Spartan constitution. So according to Herodotus, he stated, "O Lycurgus, you are a god," and Plutarch suggests that Lycurgus travelled to Delphi to receive the god's advice through the form of a retra. So I know I mentioned before, but again, this is a bit of a simplification because I'm focused on very specific writers, and you'll see that most of, if not all the time, the historical evidence from writers matches the source sheet I've given you, okay? And so modern interpretations of Lycurgus reveal a far more sceptical view of the Great Retra and Lycurgus. Paul Cartledge, a British historian, states that Lycurgus is, quote, a mystery inside an enigma. Andrew Bayliss supports Cartledge's view, stating Lycurgus remains an elusive figure. Sarah Pomeroy goes further, though, asserting that the study of Lycurgus should be approached cautiously. So if you ever got a question in the HSC around the issue of Lycurgus, you really need to bring forward what is the main contention, show what the ancient writers are saying, and then you need to then counter that with what modern historians are saying too. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah? And that'd be a really great way to respond to that if you've got a question on that. Next part we have is the roles and privileges of the two kings. Okay, and so a little quick summary here is Sparta had two kings to unify the two competing clans, the Agiads and Eurypontids of the region. The structure of government with two kings was born out of the rising power of aristocrats and elders, and was an attempt to avoid tyranny. The stability of this political system is evident in its unchanging existence for 300 years. Ancient historians such as Herodotus and Aristotle, I'm already kicking myself that I forgot to bold those two names, but anyway, we'll move forward, write glowingly of our Sparta's perfect blend government. However, it needs to be acknowledged that their accounts are skewed, as they are told from Athens, removed from Sparta, therefore lacking evidence. In regards to the roles, we look at military first. They were the supreme commanders of the army. One was selected to lead a campaign, while the other remained in Sparta. The kings had the right to declare war, but never did so. And in the field, they had the absolute right of deciding life or death. However, this comes in, it's really important to acknowledge this. 2 ephors accompanied the king on campaign, and they kept close supervision on his leadership. The king could, as a result of that, be recalled and heavily punished if the campaign failed. And in regards to evidence, ancient writer Xenophon states, quote, the kings had the command in war and, quote, managed military strategy, while modern historian Paul Cartledge suggests that Spartan kingship was primarily a military office. Okay, so both ancient and moderns are acknowledging the military significance of their military role. Religiously, though, they also were quite important. They were regarded as intermediaries between the gods and men, and only held their office as long as the gods were pleased. The kings were priests of Zeus, Lacedaemonius, and Zeus Uranios from both major tribes. Again, that linking between the 2 local tribes. Before leaving on campaign, the king sacrificed to Zeus, and if the omens were favourable, the army could proceed to the frontier. The kings also appointed 2 Pythioi to consult the oracle of Delphi, and the kings were responsible for safekeeping of all these oracles. An ancient writer Plutarch states the kings were priests of Zeus, while Pausanias asserts that the Spartan kings were responsible for sacred rituals. Sarah Pomeroy suggests that the religious roles and privileges of the kings reinforced their authority. So we have a modern writer acknowledging the religious role they had, supporting their political role. Also, they had a judicial role, but it was very limited. They decided on marriages of orphan heiresses, and they also had control of all matters concerning highways and the adoption of children. So regarding their judicial role, Paul Cartledge asserts that the, quote, king's authority was limited but significant, and while Andrew Baylor suggests that in their judicial role they were, quote, guardians of tradition and religious law. Now, in regards to privileges, what I've tried to do here is just show you what their privileges are through ancient writers and modern writers. So Herodotus states that, quote, they sit first at the public banquets, are served first and receive double portions. Xenophon highlights further privileges, stating, the king shall have the seat of honour at all public games and receive the first portion of sacrificial victims. The kings were supported at the expense of the state, evident in Plutarch's writings, where he states that kings received public maintenance at the state's expense. And the ancient writings are supported by modern historian Sarah Pomeroy, suggesting that, quote, even in a society of equals, Spartan kings stood apart. While Paul Cartledge views the privileges of the kings with a more critical eye, stating that privileges were primarily ritualistic and symbolic in nature. Can we just bring back here? First portion of sacrificial victims, that is not human sacrifice. Okay, that is the animals that they've sacrificed. They're getting the first cut of the meat. Okay? Yep, please don't write that they performed human sacrifice, okay? Also, those Oreos, please open them and start eating them if you would like them. Apparently they have got the double filling, which I've never seen before. Hey? There you go. That's a pretty contentious view there, Annabelle, but yeah. Okay. I'm sure there'll probably be comments, possibly if the one person who views this might comment on that as well. The Oreo. What's better, the cream or the cookie? Now, in regards to Spartan government, the Spartan constitution was made of 3 forms of government: democracy, oligarchy, and monarchy. The democratic aspect was evident in the assembly. The oligarchic aspect was evident in the Gerousia, while the monarchic aspect was evident in the 2 kings. And so that's a bit of I feel like this is a pretty good breakdown of how it works, and you can kind of see who elects who and who supervises who. But you can come back to that and look at that in your own time if you need to. Essentially, when we look at the E48 or the E4s, they were a pretty important group within Spartan government, especially when you see how they also were pretty much supervising the kings. So the E4s were expected to keep a check on kings both at home and abroad. E4s dealt with foreign embassies and envoys. If war was declared, the E4s decided on the age classes and issued orders mobilising the army. Furthermore, they gave instructions to the generals and recalled them if they failed. Is that a question there? Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's a monarchy, duarchy, and
So it's a monarchy, if we come back here. It's a democracy, oligarchy, and monarchy. And democracy is...
so which part is the which part of
The E4s would be part of, they are also, I guess, they are part of, if we look at it, they're not really, there's a democratic aspect because they get elected, okay? But they're also some form of oligarchy because they're a small group controlling a lot of the government. but the Gerousia also falls into that play. So when I say democracy here, it is with inverted commas, because who's the only people that are part of the assembly? Male Spartans, right? Citizens. So, and considering they're only a small part of the population, a huge part of the population of Sparta is not involved in any political representation. So, yeah. Does that?
Because Spartans are actually the minority.
Massive minority in regards to population, yes. So also the ephors were in total control of the training and discipline of the young, so they were very heavily involved in the agoge. They also chose the 3 captains of the elite corps of the Spartan army, and the big one was the Crypteia was under orders from the ephors, and we always remember the Crypteia, don't we? Yeah, because of how full on. Well, we're gonna relearn about them, okay? Now. So, what I'm going to do, because this is a very long presentation, I'm not going to go through the evidence here. Does that sound okay? It's going to be all available for you, but for every bit of content, there is essentially a corresponding page of evidence. Does that make sense? Is that all right? The idea is that there's an expectation. You want to get a sense of what ancients and moderns are writing about each of these. Yeah? The fact that I'm trying to reuse some historians will hopefully be helpful. Okay? So, in regards to the Gerousia was the oligarchic element in the constitution, which consisted of 30 members, 2 kings and 28 elders over the age of 60, selected for life based on merit and lineage. Okay, so a very selective group. So, we have a confused face there. We got any questions? No, go for it.
No, I said something before and I forget what it was.
That's okay. If it comes back.
No, everybody's reminded me.
Okay. Yeah. So essentially, once you're elected over 60 into the Gerousia, you stay in there until you die. And then they elect someone else. Okay? The Gerousia prepared and proposed motions to be presented to the Ecclesia, which is the assembly of citizens, for approval. The Gerousia served as the highest court in Sparta, holding the power to try cases involving capital punishment or exile. And lastly, the Gerousia deliberated on policy matters and could veto decisions made by the Ecclesia, ensuring alignment with Spartan interests. So again, that last bit, aligning with Spartan interests, goes back to the Spartan goals. Yeah? And then when you see here they can veto any decisions made by the Ecclesia, that also shows the democratic aspect of the Ecclesia is really not that democratic. Here's some evidence for you to look at in your own time. In regards to the Ecclesia, they were the Spartan assembly of full citizens over a certain age, often said to be 30. So a good job, Charlotte. Which met periodically to vote on proposals, but put before them by other bodies such as the Gerousia. The Ecclesia are not coming up with proposals. They would get called together to look at proposals and vote on them. They elected major magistrates such as the 5 ephors and the elders of the Gerousia. And they served as a check, though limited, on other institutions. So while the assembly's power was constrained through veto powers of the Gerousia or kings, its approval was required for certain major decisions. So again, they do have some sort of rolling process, but they aren't really that important in regards to actual voting power. And there's more evidence there from ancients and moderns. So let's look at social structure. I'm not going to read this bit on the right. You can look at it in your own time. But essentially, Spartiates, referred to as homioi, or full citizens, were all males over the age of 30 who completed their education and training and enjoyed citizenship of the polis. What does polis translate to in English? Do you remember?
It's like the one
State. Very good. Okay. Spartiate citizenship carried many social, political, religious, and military obligations. Spartiates were expected to be obedient and compliant to all requests of the state. They didn't have a lot of freedom. And in addition to their military role, the state wanted men to marry and produce children. And that last bit, when we look at marriage customs, it's really interesting to see what the modern historians write about their view on that. This idea that marriage being almost mandatory, not for any other reason, but to reproduce and create healthy children for the state. Yeah. They were considered Spartan citizens, but the Spartiates refers to male citizens. Okay? Yeah. Then we have the periokoi, or the translation, those who live around, were free non-citizens who lived in surrounding towns and villages under Spartan control. They lacked political rights in Sparta, and they could not vote in the ecclesia. They served as the middle class of Spartan society, engaging in commerce, craftsmanship, manufacturing, and trade. They played an important role as hoplites, okay, so foot soldiers and sailors supporting Spartan campaigns, but they were subordinate to Spartiates. Okay, we're going to look at it later, but why were the Perioikoi so important for the Spartans?
Because Spartans weren't allowed to make their own stuff. Like, they weren't allowed to do crafts or anything because, like, I guess what it was like feminine or something. Probably. So Perioikoi are basically the only ones who could do it because the Helots were too stupid and dumb to, not really, but like they.
What were the Helots focused on working on? The land. Yeah.
They were essentially a surplus. They didn't
Yeah.
really do anything except for that. So they were like the only ones who could actually like make things like
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
swords and weapons and
So,
stuff.
were you going to say something there, Taylor?
I was going to say they relied on the trade routes.
Yeah. Yeah. Right, they're artisans, they're merchants, they're traders, so everything that, and this is where the Sparta mirage and the myths around Sparta come from, that they were very self-reliant, and in reality they were actually reliant on the craft, the trade, the economy that the Perioikoi upheld. Yeah, so never underestimate the importance of the Perioikoi for Spartans in achieving their goals. Okay, then we have the inferior. Oh yes, Annabelle.
Sorry,
That's
something else, but I just need clarification on something. The other day, we had the HSC woman come in.
Yeah.
And someone asked the question can we write our student number after we finish the exam, or does it have to be on during the exam? And she kind of just was like, just write on your page whenever you go through the page. But if I just still keep waiting till the end to write my student number, that's okay?
I would always assume that you can't, and so what you do is you put your hand up. If for some reason the exam ends and you haven't done HSC number, you're just putting your hand up, wait till someone literally comes over to you and you communicate that to them.
Okay.
Yeah? And so if that's the case, and then if the HSC exam's finished and you haven't done your HSC number on it, hand up, they'll come over to you. Once they're standing next to you, explain your situation to them, and then if they are good with it, just do it while they're watching you.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Run a whole nother
But
paragraph.
But just never assume I'd have them come over. Yep. Okay. Inferiors are that ambiguous group that we don't really know who they are, but a lot of, I guess, the discussion from historians over time has been that they're a range of groups of people. Okay, so they're like this ambiguous group that's below the Spartans, but above Helots. And so some groups that might fall into that category are the Hypomeones, the former Spartiates who lost status for different reasons, the Tresontes, the branded cowards who were dishonoured and ostracised, the Neodemodes, the freed Helots granted a quasi-citizen status often after military service, and then we have the Mothacs. They were the sons of Helots or poor Spartiates who were raised along Spartiates, sometimes allowed to rise socially through military merit. And these are kids that usually would play with Spartan children until they went off to the Agoge. Yeah. Well, this is the thing. This is the whole thing, is that there was economic inequality.
Because I remember you talking about like the land.
Yeah.
Like, it's given land.
Yeah. And so the myth that comes from that is this idea that land was distributed equally from Lycurgus, and it wasn't distributed equally. Okay, and then what happened over time is that when people died and members of that family inherited it, or that wife inherited it, some Spartan families actually had more land than others, and over time, when the Spartans actually population dropped, more and more people, there was a bigger divide between who owned land and who didn't. Yeah.
How did like fathers give out their land if women could inherit it?
So they were divided among all their children. Yeah. And it may not have been equal, but they did divide it, yeah. So that's why women could inherit land from their family, and then they could inherit land from their husbands too. The other thing on that is, Brianna, that's a really good point, is that you could, apparently, well, according to what they've written, is that Spartiates could lose citizenship status if they could not provide their allotted food to the Syssidia. Yeah? And so if you've got small land and you've got poor land and you can't provide food, you lose citizenship. So then I don't know how you're meant to survive after that. Yeah. Crazy. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, and then lastly, in the social structure, so we have the Spartiates, the Perioikoi, the inferiors, and then the Helots. Helots were state-owned serfs, and you can use that language, that's fine. Primarily from Messenia and Laconia, who farmed land allotted to Spartiates. So Helots made up a large proportion of the population of Spartan Society. There's always contention around how many there were. Helots were oppressed through constant threat of violence, subject to ritual humiliation and systematic terror through the Crypteia. Also evident in the fact that they declared war on Helots every year. Okay, once the ephors got re-elected, the first thing they did was declare war on the Helots. Helots allowed Spartiates to focus solely on warfare by producing food and performing menial labour. So then we look at the Spartan army. The agoge was like their school, okay? But it was like lined up with military values. The agoge was the rigorous state-sponsored education and training system through which all Spartiates were shaped from childhood into ideal warriors and loyal members of the state. It was a comprehensive socialization process designed to instill discipline and loyalty to Sparta, and above all, obedience to authority. The agoge system reinforced the Spartan goal of subordination of the individual to the collective good. So we're not going to go through this. This is something you can go through in your own time, but there's a process of their agoge. I think it's good to know that there's a breakdown, yeah. And again, the big thing here is, if you're writing about this, I would not be expecting you to describe the initiation stage, the adolescent stage, the pre-military service stage, and the full military integration, exactly like this. You need to have an understanding of the breakdown of each of those stages. The key thing is you need to be able to show what is the purpose of these stages. How do they socialize these young men into being obedient and disciplined, essentially following everything the state that says. Does that kind of make sense? Always link it back to that central argument. Okay?
So the reason the ecclesia is meant over 30 is because that's when they
Yeah,
graduate from
yeah.
the agoge.
And then that way they're not full time at the agoge doing what they need to do. Okay? So this is a simple breakdown, but when we look at Spartan army composition, this is what we could be writing about. The main thing is the core force are the Spartiates, okay, and they form the elite hoplite infantry. Hoplite, we're talking about foot soldiers, but they're heavily armed. Okay, they fought in tight phalanx formations that made them such a hard army to beat. They were heavily armoured with bronze shields, spears, helmets, breastplates, and a red cloak symbolising blood and unity. Then you also have the Perikoi. Although they were that middle class, that sort of professional business class of the Spartan Society, they also fought alongside the Spartans. They were crucial in campaigns because Spartiates needed the numbers. Helots also served in the army, but they were lightly armed attendants, squires, rowers, or combatants when necessary. Why do you think they would have Helots, more as attendants rather than actually the Perikoi fighting alongside? Well, sacrifices maybe, but
It's like if someone wasn't as determined to go forward, everyone would be something.
yeah. But if they're lightly armed, they're not very heavily weaponized. What would
They
they?
didn't care if they died.
They didn't care if they died, but think about what are the Spartans always fearful of?
Oh,
Helot uprising.
I have to give them weapons.
Do not give them weapons. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Because the main motivation was that if an helot displayed really
Yeah.
close army skills, they would be upgraded into an inferior.
Yeah.
Which is a bit funny that
I know the word inferior, right? But yeah, that's right. If they did serve well, they possibly could be released from their helot duties.
And it gives the appearance, it gives the appearance that there can be social mobility.
Yeah, yeah.
Really much.
But the key thing here to understand is that helots did serve in the army, but they were not heavily armed because there was always this anxiety from Spartan citizens of a helot uprising. Now, the other thing is, the Spartans, they did fight on their own, but they always worked with allied forces, okay? So they did lead a coalition of allied city-states during wars, and the best example to talk about is the Peloponnesian League during the Peloponnesian War, okay? And then there were special units that they had, okay? And the big one that you want to know about is the officers, such as pole marchers, were drawn from the elite Spartiates. So they were the ones who would lead their unit. Okay, there's evidence for you to look at in your own time. Now, control of the helots. It's a really big one. The military organisation of Sparta was used as a tool to dominate the helot population. The Spartan army's constant readiness and internal discipline acted as a deterrent to helot rebellion. Okay, the army was not only used in external warfare, but also mobilised to suppress internal unrest especially during campaigns like the annual declarations of war on the helots. And this is why ancient writers talk about Spartans not being encouraged to drink alcohol, always having weapons on them, because of this constant fear and anxiety of a helot uprising. And I think because of that constant fear and anxiety, that supports arguments that the helot population must have been quite significant. Okay? Now the Syssidia. What's, in your own words, what do you remember the Syssidia being? Mess, yeah, the mess, right? And does anyone remember the rules around them? So when you just get into the Syssidia, what has to happen?
You have to join a group.
Yeah, you got to join it's almost like a dining group. Yeah, your little clique.
It's an extended thing.
Yeah, and that's your unit then. That's your family. And if you don't get accepted into a group, what happens?
You get outcast.
Yeah, you're outcast. Yeah, okay. Yeah, because this whole idea is that you need to be part of it. You need to belong. Okay? But the thing is that... What was I, sorry? Yeah. And the thing is that when you were part of that group, you were united in, you're against the helots. So the city bound male citizens together through communal dining and military fraternity, reinforcing group loyalty and unity. This social bonding created a shared ideological commitment to Spartan superiority and justified a collective vigilance over the helots. And then we have the Crypteia. Okay, the Crypteia was a form of institutionalized terror, where selected youths would patrol the countryside, especially at night, and just kill helots who appeared strong, rebellious, or independent. And how are they chosen? Do you remember?
The efforts shows their favour of only
Ye-
students, essentially.
Yeah, and the ones who probably were ticking all the boxes, the best performing soldiers, young men, were chosen. And they were usually chosen around the age of 18, 19. And why do you think they would have chosen them then to be the Crypteia around, let's say, someone who's a 30-year-old?
Because the 30-year-old impressionable.
Yeah, well, yeah, and impressionable. By the time you're probably hitting 30, maybe some 30-year-old men probably still are very impressionable, but at 19, you are much more impressionable than a 30-year-old. And you're going to be following orders a lot more. And you've been really into the Igoge system. Yep. Yeah. That's everything. And so the Crypteia also serves as a means of psychological warfare, instilling fear and discouraging resistance. So if you're a helot who has some kind of thought in the back of your mind that you want to rise, that fear of the Crypteia coming and finding out and just taking your life away would always been there. And then to add to that, the ephors, when they were annually elected, they would declare annually war on the helots, allowing Spartans to legally kill helots, reinforcing their status as state-owned enemies. This formalised state of war blurred the line between warfare and domestic repression. Could you imagine on that day knowing that the ephors being elected and they're just like, I've just got to stay out of sight? Because if I'm outside and they come down this way, yeah, it's like a purge, yeah.
Could they run away? Like, leave before they came?
I don't know. Yeah, I really don't know. Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. So,
start here.
now in regards to women, this is the big one again. When we compare Spartan women to Athenian women, it always makes them look like their lives were incredible, right? And so this is important to know, is that in comparison to Athenian women, they did experience relatively high status, and they did play a significant role in Spartan society. Okay? Primarily, Spartan women were seen as playing a role in contributing strong Spartan children to the state. However, they also played an economic role through the managing of estates. And this is something you don't want to gloss over. They could inherit land from birth, and then when they were married and their husbands were off at war, or they were doing their training, the women were expected to run that estate. They were meant to manage the helots in the farming because they had to do an allotment to the Syssidia. Okay? If that husband dies, that woman inherits that land too. So they're actually running quite a lot of land. Furthermore, Spartan women experienced high status through their contribution to the Spartan ideology, most prominently through giving birth to kids. Now, from an economic standpoint though, they had significant economic power due to their ability to inherit and own land. And by the 4th century BCE, it is estimated that women owned up to 40% of the land in Sparta. This was largely due to frequent deaths of male warriors in battle, leading to women inheriting their estates. Now, Aristotle, he's definitely doesn't write very well about women. Unlike women in other Greek city-states, Spartan women received state-sponsored education. This included physical training alongside boys, as well as cultural instruction, such as reading, writing, music, and dance. The aim was to produce strong mothers who could bear healthy children for Sparta. And then lastly, with control over substantial land holdings, Spartan women played a crucial role in managing estates and finances. Spartan women enjoyed more freedom and respect compared to their counterparts in other Greek city-states. They were allowed to participate in public life, own property, and had a significant influence on family and societal matters. And there's a bit of evidence there from ancient and modern writers for you to look at. Okay, now we're up to looking at the economy. So, land ownership. The Spartan economy was agrarian, which means agriculture, relying on farming rather than trade or coinage. Agriculture was carried out by the Helots, allowing Spartiates to focus on military duties. Each city's sustenance was based on the productivity of their land and Helots. And the system was designed for autarky, which means self-sufficiency, discouraging economic innovation. And the reality is this is what actually led to the downfall of Sparta, is because they were discouraging innovation, adapting. When things did change, they were too slow to change.
Self-sufficiency mean that like the plants grow and the helots don't need to do anything?
No, self-sufficiency means autarky is the idea that you only rely on yourself and no other communities outside you.
A very strong, independent Spartiate. You don't
Yeah.
need any other Spartiate.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, in regards to land ownership, the Spartan Mirage, and this is what we were talking about before, Brianna, claims that land was distributed equally by Lycurgus to all Spartan citizens. Over time, though, land ownership became increasingly concentrated among fewer families due to inheritance laws and dowries. Spartiate males were expected to possess land to support their obligations as full citizens. And if they couldn't fulfill their their obligations, they're losing citizenship. Women came to own a significant portion of land due to inheritance and demographic decline among Spartiates. Now, kleroi. Do we remember that word? Kleroi being plural, kleros being singular. Kleroi were land allotments granted to Spartiates to ensure economic independence and the ability to sustain their mess contributions. Each kleros came with specific helots who worked the land and provided a fixed tribute. Kleroi were hereditary, but over time fewer Spartiates inherited them due to demographic and legal constraints. So loss or absence of a kleros meant loss of citizenship status or inability to maintain it. So there's some significant repercussions.
So all Spartiates are equal, but some are more equal.
Exactly right, yeah. There's the contradiction. Okay, so in regards to Helots, Helots were state-owned serfs, we've already looked at that, primarily drawn from conquered territories. They farmed the land and handed over a portion of produce to their Spartiate masters. This is really important. Helots were essential to the Spartan economy, but their population outnumbered Spartiates, posing a constant threat of revolt. Their oppression was institutionalized, for example, in the annual declaration of war, and vital to sustaining the elite warrior class. And I really like this quote from Paul Cartledge, when he states that the Helots were, quote, the backbone of the Spartan economy. It's a great, easy quote to remember. Okay? So, in regards to technology, and this is actually something we can look up as when we look at the decline of Sparta, is because of the lack of innovation here. Spartan weaponry was primarily functional, so it was standardized for efficiency rather than innovation. The main weapon was the doru, which is a spear approximately 2 to 3 meters long, which is significantly long when you think about it, like look at the length of this table.
Is this 3 meters?
Ideal for phalanx warfare.
Maybe like up to here.
Yeah, it's pretty long. So the idea is that you're holding that out in front of your shield, you're putting a 2 meter barrier between you and your enemy. Then, Spartans also carried a short sword called the siphos, used in close combat when spears were impractical. In addition to armor, Spartan hoplites wore bronze cuirasses, which is the breastplate, greaves, which is across their legs, and the iconic Corinthian helmet offering extensive protection. They are pretty much like shin pads, pretty much, but very not as comfortable. The aspis, which is the hoplite shield, which you'd recognise, was central, marked with the Greek letter lambada there, for representing Lacedaemon. In regards to pottery, Spartan pottery was functional and austere, often in contrast to the decorative style of Athens. Laconian pottery was exported and valued particularly for its black figure technique, like the one here and here. And pottery often featured military mythological themes reflecting Spartan values and ideals. So even their pottery was linking back to that central argument around supporting the Spartan state and their ideology. Okay? Now, by the classical period, and we look at classical period is essentially what our part of the syllabus focuses on. So the militarization.
Was
Yeah.
it just the period where they make the pottery, or was it?
Yeah, predominantly, yeah. They were like the artisan class.
So does that mean that, like, this body, people can do their, like, hobbies, like, making pottery, or?
When we look at leisure, their hobbies were always linked to supporting, so like hunting, might have been like dancing or doing gymnastic stuff. Yeah,
It's like your hobby is like sword sharpening.
exactly right. And so by the classical period. So what the part we're going to look at a little bit later is that by the classical period, this stuff all starts to decline because Sparta gets really, really intensely focused on inward focused societies. So they're not looking at external societies, and they're also focusing on military. Okay, so other things don't matter. Okay, there's evidence there for you to look at as well. Now we've already kind of looked at this, but if you get a question on this, I feel like this would be such a good question because the role of the Pericoi and Helots in the economy is unparalleled. Okay, so in regards to the economic role of Pericoi, they're the craftsmen, they're the artisans, they are the traders and they're merchants, and they're also the industrial and economic specialists. Okay, and so the Spartans are relying on them to do a lot. But also, they're not citizens, but they're also, which is also, I feel like a bit of a slap in the face. They're not full citizens, but they're also expected to contribute tax, right?
I don't even pay
To help the Spartans out, right? Yep. Yeah. Specialists. Now, this is something. If you get a question on this, if you get a question on this, this is where I really think these little headings in bold can be really helpful because it helps you break it down into themes. So if you're saying that the Pericoi served as craftsmen and artisans, and then you focus on what that looked like.
Isn't it pronounced
Artisans. Tomato. Yep.
Well, then, like, the Pericoi did, like, the craft, and the Helots did the agriculture.
Yeah, and domestic stuff too, but not only a little bit. So so anything that was specialised, Pericoi look after. Anything that's menial labour, the Helots did. Okay, there's some arguments from ancient and modern writers there. And then when we look at the role of Helots, the main thing you got to say is that they're the agricultural labourers. They are responsible for all agricultural produce. Okay, and the big thing is they had to produce surplus. Because one, the Spartians have to provide that to the Syssitia, and then they get a tiny little staple of that so they can stay alive, right? Okay, and then in addition to agriculture, they were the domestic and skilled labourers as well. Okay, so they might have been supporting the Pericoi, but they might have been doing some menial work around the house. Okay, was that a question, Brianna? No? Okay. And there's some more. And then, the other one is they had a military support role too. Okay. Now this one here, I really want us to just spend a little bit of time on because this one here we can get carried away with this idea that all the Spartans were carrying these big heavy iron bars to pay for things. Okay, but it served a purpose for Sparta to be a bit austere, like strict, and to be a bit like, I guess, basic in the way they did things. So Sparta's use of bulky iron bars as currency was a state-mandated currency. It came from the Spartan state, deliberately designed to discourage accumulation of wealth and luxury in accordance with Lycurgus's reforms. In practicality, the iron bars was meant to limit economic inequality and external trade, supporting Spartan ideals of austerity and communalism, so this idea of unity. Okay, but also, as we already looked at land ownership, it wasn't equal. So this wasn't going to be the case now. These bars were only valid within Sparta, preventing significant trade with other poleis or other states. They used silver or gold, thereby insulating the Spartan economy. This bit's been really important. This is what the modern writers write about. Iron bars function more as a tool of social engineering than efficient currency. What do you think that means?
It means that it wasn't meant to be used as currency so much as it was like symbolic.
Yeah, symbolic and a way of shaping society or controlling the way they behave. Reinforcing self-sufficiency and discouraging external economic ties. So it's trying to promote this idea that we only need to rely on ourselves. So in regards to trade, Sparta deliberately limited foreign trade to avoid the influence of luxury goods and corrupting ideas from other Greek states. Trade and crafts were largely handled by the Perikoi, who maintained some commercial activity on behalf of the Spartan state. Some essential imports, such as metal and luxury items for religious or diplomatic purposes, were acquired through state-controlled or Perikoi trade, not private markets. And Sparta's minimal naval power meant less engagement in widespread maritime trade, unlike Athens limiting its economic expansion. Does anyone remember any content from Term 4 last year that would challenge some of this stuff?
I remember there was like a bunch of Spartan like pottery shards that was found all over like Europe.
Yep.
Like I think there was one in France.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, so there's a lot of Spartan stuff found across trade routes all across Europe. And remember the Vix Crata or the Hydria, and we're going to talk about those because these kind of undermine some of the Spartan myth of that they were completely closed off. Okay, yeah.
Wasn't it something like the soldiers while they were on campaigns? Did we do that? Is that what first went there? Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
Possibly, yeah.
They would do trade or...
Yeah, and that would make sense. That if you're going beyond your borders to a foreign part, it makes sense that you'd be curious and you would be trading possibly something,
Yeah.
and you might even have like little ivory votive figurines that you pray with. You might be trading those, or it might be an ivory hairbrush or something. Yeah.
Huge spear.
He's my
Yeah.
3 meter spear.
No, they can't give that away. They'd get in trouble. So.
They drop it and they can't come back.
And so, but one thing here really quickly is that with the ancient writers, like Xenophon is very biased, and you can see it when he outly praises Sparta's economic reforms. Okay, but Andrew Baylis is very critical when he highlights, as the bottom here, the contradictory nature of Spartan trade being closed but also reliant on outsiders, and so that's where he's kind of pulling up the ancient writers saying this doesn't make sense. Okay. So further evidence of trade, though, is that there appears to be a strong connection between the fine spots of Laconian bronzes outside Sparta, and long-established trade routes used in the trading and transportation of metals. Okay, so what that means is that iron and silver from modern-day Italy were traded with Sparta, as well as tin from Brittany, France, because they found those in Sparta, okay, and with the products they were making. Furthermore, though, evidence of diplomacy along trade routes has been found through the Vix Crata, discovered in Burgundy, which is in France, and the Hydria, discovered in Switzerland. Okay, remember they're these huge vessels, and they're not practical in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so one sec, Annabelle. And so common opinion, based on the size and sophistication of the Vix Crata and the Hydria, is that they would have been diplomatic gifts to Celtic chiefs. So that is kind of leaning to this idea that they at some point, Sparta was engaged with the outside world. Yes?
Just for this sheet,
Yep.
should we, are these probably the 3 most important writers?
And so as I said at the start in the recording, I'm simplifying it for you. Doesn't mean you can't go beyond that. Yeah. So there's other ancient writers that we're going to look at really quickly that you could refer to.
Aristotle.
Yeah, exactly right. There's Pausanias as well. But and there's other modern writers too, but that's an easy way to sort of, simplify it for you. Yeah. Okay, we are on, we got a little bit more. So, in regards to religion, Artemis Orthia. Okay, so remember Artemis Orthia is like a combination of like a sister of Apollo, and they think that also the other part is an ancient goddess from the Dorian tribes. So they kind of put it together. So Artemis Orthia was central to rites of passage, particularly for young males. Her sanctuary was the site of the ritual flogging, okay, which sounds like a lot of fun for those poor young men. It represented order, discipline, and the transition from youth to adulthood. It was tightly linked to the agoge. Artemis Orthia, worship was uniquely Spartan, which was unusually harsh and militaristic compared to other Greek cults. And her cult reinforced obedience, endurance, and communal identity, which is essential to Spartan society. We also have Poseidon. And this bit's interesting because we already immediately go Poseidon to the ocean, okay? But Poseidon in Sparta was worshipped primarily as what they say Poseidon Gyokos, which means earth shaker, reflecting his dual role in land and sea and his association with earthquakes. He was revered in military and naval contexts, and his cult had Dorian roots, which is the ancient part of Sparta, and was part of broader Peloponnesian religious traditions. Yes?
Is he the one where people like throw horses off boats?
Yeah, exactly. He was sacred to the elite warrior classes, connected to the Spartans' control of the sea during their brief naval prominence in the Peloponnesian War. And then we also have Apollo. Apollo was the patron of harmony, order, music, and prophecy, and was aligned with Spartan ideals of discipline and balance. He was central to the Carneia, which is what? Do you remember what the Carneia is? Religious festival, okay?
Isn't that the one where they roll the cheese down the hill?
So, he was central to the Carneia, one of the most important Spartan festivals involving military exercises and processions. His oracle at Delphi strongly influenced Spartan policy and warfare, and it represented rationality and moderation, aligning with the austere and orderly image of Sparta. Okay, do you remember these two?
Yep.
We know about Lycurgus and the Dioscuri. Okay, great. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go over Lycurgus again because we already looked at him before. Okay, but we got to talk about Lycurgus as a myth and a legend. Okay, there may have been a historical figure at some point that was Lycurgus, but the way he became understood is more semi-mythical. Okay, then we get to the Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux. They were the twin sons of Zeus, who were considered patron gods of Spartan warriors, symbolizing unity, brotherhood, and martial excellence. They represented ideal Spartan values, loyalty, bravery, and protection of comrades. They were also linked to Spartan kingship, especially through the myth of their sister Helen and association with divine descent. At the Dromos, the sports field running course in Sparta, there was a sanctuary of the Dioscuri, and there were statues of both brothers there. Okay, so we notice here, one myth or legend is Lycurgus, who's linked to establishing the constitution of Sparta, which set up the state that it became. And then the other legend or myth is two brothers who are linked to Spartan warriors. So you can kind of see, again, back to that central argument. Okay? All right, here we go. So, festivals. The Hyacinthia was a major Apollo-centric festival held at Amyclae, and it celebrated two phases. Mourning for Hyacinthos, a youth who accidentally was killed by Apollo, followed by joyful celebrations in Apollo's honour. I kind of feel like that's quite weird. In one day, you're mourning someone who died because of Apollo, and in the same day, you're then also celebrating Apollo. Okay? Anyway, why not? It reflects Spartan values of discipline, respect for tradition, and dualism of death and renewal. And it's also involved public sacrifices, singing, dancing, and feasting, with participation from all social classes, including the Perioikoi. The Gymnopaedia was a festival of nude male dancing and athletic competition held in the Agora, which is like, the Agora would be considered like the central marketplace, to honour Apollo, Artemis, and Leto. It functioned as a rite of passage, showcasing military readiness, endurance, and the physical excellence of Spartan youth. It reinforced communal identity and Spartan ideals of austerity, courage, and harmony. It also served as a public display of age-graded citizen cohorts, reaffirming social structure. And then lastly, we have the Carneia, which is a major military religious festival in honour of Apollo Carneos, associated with Dorian identity and agricultural cycles. It was characterised by delayed military activity, and you can see this from Herodotus, where he reports that Spartans were religiously bound to avoid battle during Carneia, explaining their absence from the Battle of Marathon. Okay? So, if Carneia is happening, you can't go to war.
So would that be the most important one out of the three of the festivals?
I think that they're all important in their own ways. But yeah, you could say that this one has high significance because of its ability to stop war. It featured rituals of order and restraint, including a simulated military pursuit, symbolising control over chaos.
That's the cheese.
Yeah, that's right. And then reinforced seasonal rhythms, political unity, and divine sanctions for warfare and agriculture. We're not going to go with this. It's a copy of slide 20, okay, from 2.2 in the syllabus. It's the same thing, okay. Funerary customs and rituals, HSC trials, yeah? Was that in the HSC trials, I think, from memory? Yeah.
Those are the ones that were great.
So, this is something we can do. Break this down, guys, into themes. When we look at funerary customs and rituals, in case you get this in the HSC, guys, it can happen. The trials in the HSC are not the same thing, and they're written by different people. One of the customs and rituals is the idea that everyone is equal in death. So Spartan funerary customs reflected social equality, particularly among male citizens. So elaborate tombs were generally avoided, and simple burial was practiced to avoid displays of wealth. Honour through death in battle or childbirth. So only men who died in battle and women who died in childbirth were given inscribed tombstones. Again, this idea is that these are understood as forms of noble sacrifice for the state. Funeral rites were state regulated with no excessive grief and a short mourning period, emphasising stoicism, discipline and community over personal loss. And there's some evidence for you. Okay? So, if you get this in HSC, break it down into these themes. Okay? Alright guys, we're on the last dot point and we're nearly there. You've been amazing. So, in regards to art, sculptures in Sparta often took the form of religious dedications, okay, seen in Artemis Orthia. They were mostly used to honour gods and honour military achievements, okay. Sculptural offerings were sent to major sanctuaries like Delphi and Olympia, asserting that they were engaged with the wider Greek world. And while Sparta likely commissioned works from other Greek regions, there is evidence of local workshops, especially during the archaic period. So this is before our syllabus, okay? But it shows that during this time, Sparta was definitely much more diverse. Yeah.
What about that in HSC? Because would they know what section we're in?
Yeah.
Like, so if we wrote about the archaic period, would they be like, cool with it?
Yeah, 100%. It's a great thing to use.
Would they like
Yeah.
mark you for showing like extensive knowledge?
Yeah.
Well, in the criteria, there's always the stuff about, yeah, absolutely. Relevant terminology for sure. In regards to painted vases, the Laconian vases were often decorated with mythological martial scenes. So martial meaning military. So they're always linking back to the main purpose of the state, okay? And these vases were exported, okay, to other parts of to Italy and the Aegean, which is other parts of Greece. Okay, and again, they were always displaying Spartan ideals, but then by the classical period, which comes later, which is closer to what we look at in our syllabus, this vase production declined, reflecting a shift in focus from artistic to military and state concerns. Okay, and then lastly, bone and ivory carving, and they found a lot of these in tombs. Okay, these small, finely detailed items such as combs, pins, and plaques were marks of elite status, often found in women's sanctuaries and graves. Okay, some were always made as votive offerings, so you could go to a temple and put it forward, or it might be at home where you pray. The intricacy of bone and ivory pieces found suggests a strong artisan tradition. So it does suggest that there were some really, really good artisans working in Sparta. And the big thing is whether that is external artisans, so they're getting imported, or they have people training locally. Okay, that's the question we don't know a full answer to. But this is the big one. The existence of such luxurious items challenges the stereotype of a culturally barren, purely militaristic Sparta. If you're talking about art, that needs to be brought forward, yeah? Because it shows that argument, that differing view. And there's some good evidence there for you to look at in your own time.
Because ivory is only like, you can only get from like a select few animals.
Exactly right. And they're not in Greece, okay? So that means that also is evidence of trade too.
Yeah, so
Okay.
importing like
Yep.
elephant tusks.
Yeah.
and stuff.
In regards to architecture, we're looking at human-made things. And essentially, I'm not going to go through this too much, but this is essentially just the main features of them, and then their function and significance, okay? So the Amycleon was important because it was linked to the Hyacinthia festival, okay? The Menelaeum was important because it linked to Menelaus and Helen, okay? So linking up to some myth. And then the Sanctuary of Artemis Orthia was important because that was where the flogging ritual happened, okay? And then it was the cult belonging to all the villages. Writing and literature. Do we remember anything about Alcman and
They
Tyrtaeus?
were like poetry.
Yeah, that's right. They're both poets, but they wrote different things. Let's see if did anyone remember what Alcman wrote about versus Tyrtaeus?
One of them wrote about like little girls.
Yeah, Alcman wrote about girls. His most famous thing is called the Maiden Dance, or Maiden Song. So he wrote about Alcuin as an example, though. He probably was he was less constrained probably by the militaristic society and wrote more from about like natural beauty. Okay, and then you can see Tyrtaeus come in and he's writing all about Spartan ideals, Spartan values of courage. Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. Build up morale. Spot on. So Alcuin, okay, choral lyric poetry, so it could be sung by a choir. So a lot of stuff would have been sung by a choir of girls. Very well known for the Parthenaea, which is called maiden songs. Okay, his poetry reflects a rich cultural and aesthetic side of early Sparta. Okay.
Would that also like challenge that they were culturally?
Exactly right. It also shows he's not. If you bring it here. So it's the next slide here. What I find interesting here is that the ancient writers don't discuss Alcuin in detail. Okay? And that might be the case that the ancient writers were writing more so during the classical period about this, which means that it reflects a later neglect of his artistic contributions. But they definitely write about Tyrtaeus. Alright? And Tyrtaeus, on the other hand, he wrote reflective war poetry, inspiring courage and unity. So his poems all promoted martial values like bravery, endurance, and dying nobly for the state. Again, that's all that kind of central argument, isn't it? About do everything for the Spartan agenda. Okay, so this one here, guys, you know a lot about these people already, and you notice that Aristotle's probably someone, and Thucydides is not in your source sheet, but it's all here for you. Essentially, I'm not going to go through this, but I'm just going to talk around it. But essentially, here's the writer, here's when they were around, and that's an example of what they wrote in italics.
When we're writing like a response, do we have to say like Herodotus who wrote the history?
No, you don't have to, but sometimes it can be a really nice way to start a sentence where you say, in his work, histories, comma, Herodotus acknowledges, Herodotus describes, whatever you're going to say, or Herodotus states, and if you've got a quote. Here is just a summary on this little column here is Herodotus' view of Sparta, and here's just an example to sort of represent that view. You don't need to have those quotes, but you definitely need to know what their view was, okay? Because the reality is, with all these 6 people, they all have differing views in different contexts, okay? And so you can see that these ones here are closer to the times of Sparta that we were looking at, we study, okay? Herodotus and Thucydides are both from Athens. So they are writing from an Athenian perspective, but Herodotus is very eclectic. He likes to write stories, so you can see that he actually he's quite drawn to Sparta, especially from the war perspective and the cultural perspective. Thucydides writes a lot about war and politics, so he writes a lot about Sparta's military, but he also criticizes their inflexibility. So he actually acknowledges they're not very innovative. Like he acknowledges how good they are at war, but he talks about their lack of innovation. Xenophon was Athenian, was exiled, falls in love with Sparta, and his bias is very clear in everything he writes. You look up anything he writes, it's always positive or glowing. Okay? Then we get further along the line, we have Aristotle, again another Athenian, who is harshly critical of many aspects of Sparta. Okay? Then we have Pausanias, and you can see here, from Aristotle, ending in 322 BCE, Pausanias is not writing until after 110 CE, so it's a long time later. And you can describe him as a bit of a travel writer. So he actually is, I would say, relatively reliable because he actually mostly focuses on what he's seen rather than commenting on society, because Sparta doesn't exist anymore when he's writing about it. And then last we have Plutarch, which he is very far removed, and he's writing from ancient Rome, right? So he's a very different time period. Does that kind of make sense? So he's very removed from it, and he's relying on other writers' information. So all those people you need to take with a grain of salt and know their context and how it shapes what they write. Okay? And so it could be a question, describe, if we go look here, two Greek writers' views of Sparta. And you choose your 2 and you write about them. Yeah? Okay? It could be a bigger question, who knows? We only have 2 more slides. Okay? So leisure activities. Who asked about leisure before or hobbies? It was Annabelle, wasn't it? Yeah. So in regards to hobbies or leisure, everything was geared towards Spartan ideals. So leisure often took the form of running contests in running, wrestling, and other sports, integrated into training and festival games, reflecting the societal emphasis on physical excellence. Okay, of course, hunting came into it as a leisure activity. Okay, was a popular elite pastime. So that's the elite doing that. Okay, though more austere, so a bit more strict and less, I guess, glamorous than other Greek states like Athens, Spartan communal meals provided space for conversation, singing, and storytelling, fostering group cohesion and civic identity. So again, that's all well and good for Spartians, but if you're not a Spartan, you're not enjoying this stuff. And also, the Spartans would use religious festivals and public rituals as a form of leisure. Okay, so whether that was choral performances, okay, or dancing, that was also seen as leisure. And then there's some really interesting comments, especially from the modern historians talking about that, like Andrew Bayliss describing Spartan festivals as controlled celebrations. Okay, that was still under state control, and Paul Cutledge suggesting that, or arguing that Spartan leisure was not absent but rechanneled to support the polis. So it's always about subserving the ideology of the state. And lastly, marriage customs. Was that also in the HSC trials? Yes. Let's definitely go over this very quickly. So, here's a few things you could write about. Marriages began with a symbolic abduction of the bride by the groom, followed by a secret consummation. Husbands often visit their wives in secrecy at night, especially in early marriage. Yeah.
How they get married is the kings marry people.
The kings what, sorry?
They got married in secret. Didn't the kings marry people?
No, secret consummation, that's referring to sex.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But like,
They got married and then they had a secret. They got married and then they.
Yeah, yeah. So the marriage wasn't secret, no.
oh, okay.
Yeah. Because in some ancient societies, the consummation part was... Well, no, the consummation part was the idea that they needed to have sex to make the marriage valid.
Okay.
And so what in some societies, and even it went into medieval Europe too, they would have people confirming it happened. Yeah, and it was almost seen as like it was like a communal thing, which is so kind of crazy to think about, right? But this one here was done secretly, and husbands often visit their wives in secrecy at night, especially in early marriage, because where are the husbands? Yeah,
But
yeah.
wasn't that like encouraged? Because wasn't it
Yeah.
encouraged to be like sneaky?
It was encouraged because in ancient writers write about it a bit more, that they believed that it was creating genuine desire. And so that the marriage would be a bit more authentic. Yeah. Okay. This next dot point, though, is a bit full on. And some people claim that the Spartans were the first historical example of eugenics, which is kind of like essentially controlling genes. Now, marriage in Sparta was closely linked to the eugenic goals of the state. Right? So healthy children were essential for the military strength of Sparta, and men were to marry for procreative purposes. They weren't marrying for love; they were marrying to create children for the state. And then this bit here comes into it when we get down to here. Okay, Spartan women married later than in other Greek city-states, usually in their late teens or early 20s after physical training. This was believed to result in healthier offspring. And then lastly, practices like wife sharing and, quote, marriage loans were not uncommon, particularly if a man was infertile or unmarried. The emphasis was on producing strong Spartan citizens, not romantic exclusivity.
Are they talking about like swimming?
No, it's not that. It's more, when we looked at it was a long time ago, but we looked at this idea that if a woman was married to an older man, the ancient writers talk about that he had an obligation to have a younger man
Oh, so would it be like
have sex with that woman in the hope that she would fall pregnant with a healthy child. Yeah.
Wasn't it also like if someone had speeches that were attractive
Yep.
to the state, they would have to like.
Yep.
have lots of-
Absolutely. Because what's the goal there? Healthy children. Yeah, exactly right. Healthy children for the Spartan, or healthy Spartiate children for the state. And there's really good evidence here, right? Like Paul Carlish describes Spartan marriage
It was just fun something.
as a, quote, state-controlled sexual contract, right? Andrew Bayliss frames Spartan marriage as a political institution, okay, not a personal union. And then Sarah Pomeroy, and she always has a bit more of a focus on women, argues that the marriage customs reflected the empowered status of Spartan women. okay, who had more autonomy and maturity than their Greek counterparts. And in there, she's referring to the fact that Spartan women married later, okay, and things like that. So that is it. Thank you.
Yeah, I do.